Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Spera, along with special guest Addie and Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren. Tonight, Addie is going to talk about a haunting that occurred to her in her home that she had lived in previously for about 15 years. Suddenly, phenomena began to occur, and she'll tell us all about it tonight, and she had to call in the Warrens, of course. I think what I'd like to start out, before I talk to Addie, thanks for coming on, Addie, is to ask Lorraine and Ed about the house itself, to set up how you got the call and what happened in the home prior to you going in.
Well, Addie had contacted us and told us about phenomena that was occurring in this home. At that time, Addie was running it as a bed and breakfast. It's a beautiful old home, beautiful furnishings, and told us about things that were occurring, not just to her, her two children, and her husband, but also to people who would be guests in the home. They would hear the knocking, they would hear the rapping, they would hear the footsteps in the home. The home is a very old home, extremely old home, and Tony, it's not only is it an old home, but it's also on a very old route going through an area in the Litchfield Hills.
How old is the home?
1809.
1909?
1809.
1809, Tony.
Okay, so it's like 100 and whatever, 80 years
Right,
old, or
and
185.
they were renovating it back to its original. All of it, the stripping, the wallpaper, they were doing a great deal. Many times we know that when you start to do things where you're making renovations in a home, that is enough to trigger off spirit phenomena. Where a ghost or someone had once been able to walk through a doorway in a certain area, and now that doorway no longer exists. And with Addie, many changes had taken place in this home.
Plus the fact that she had a couple of daughters too, children.
She has a boy and a girl.
A boy and a girl.
Yeah, she has a boy and a girl.
What do you think then spawned this occurrence?
Well, I think what gave it the energy, I think the renovations in the house, I think the fact of the energy from the two children would be enough for the spirit phenomena to feed off from and enable it to become manifest to the extent that it did.
But I believe that things were happening there before you even moved in, right?
Oh, yes.
Because you had got statements from people.
The house had been haunted for a history of well over 30 years before we bought the house. When we were looking at the house with the real estate agent, we noticed that there were two staircases, and one of the doorways leading up to the front staircase had been nailed shut. And no one had lived on the second floor for 30 years.
That's not good.
One of the windows of the bedroom was broken, and vines had grown in through the window and all throughout the whole bedroom.
So nobody ever went up there?
No one did, except in 1955, there was a great flood in the Torrington area, and these people had taken in people from the Torrington area, friends of theirs, 40 of them, and let them live on the second floor. These people had no place to go, and after a week, they came downstairs, they all left, they fled. They said there was something on the second floor that didn't want them up there, and they left. And other phenomena happened, but we didn't know about it at the time when we bought the house. They sold it to us without telling us about that. So we got a bargain. We got a beautiful federal colonial, 1809, 44 acres for $60,000.
Wow.
How many acres?
44.
44 acres for
And what year did
60.
you buy the home?
Bought it 20 years ago.
So like 1976, 77?
My God.
It was a very good price.
House
I'll give her
cheap, right?
45,000 now.
You're right.
Well, we were wondering what was wrong with the house. My husband went through it thoroughly and couldn't find anything structurally wrong with the house. And we
your
moved
husband's
in.
a carpenter, right?
An engineer, but he worked his way through college as a carpenter. We moved into the house and we had a big argument. I told him, I said, stop leaving the doors open. You're letting the dogs out. And he said, I'm not leaving the doors open. He said, you're leaving the doors open.
Wow.
And this argument went back and forth, and then he pointed to the back door. He said, I can lock this door, turn my back on it in this room, then turn around, and this door's open. And so that night, we went around and we locked up every window, every door in the house. And as we went to bed, my husband said, I feel that we're locking something in with us. We're not locking something out. And then that morning, we got up and we came downstairs. Every door was open. every door. And the dogs were out on the lawn, and we became hysterical. We didn't know what was opening the doors. We couldn't understand what was happening in the house.
It had to be somebody from inside then, right?
Without a doubt. We
How-
realized there was something in the house with us.
How long after you moved into this start?
Immediately.
Immediately.
Immediately. We bought it during the summer. We were getting into fall. It was getting colder. We didn't know what was happening. And I just remember one day I just stood in the dining room and I said, I don't know who's opening the doors, but if you don't stop, I'll go next door, because we do live next door to a Catholic church. And I said, I'll bring a priest over and I'll have him bless the house. And then the doors stayed closed. But we had other phenomena that happened. We had footsteps up in our attic, and it was terrifying. We could just hear heavy footsteps going back and forth, back and forth. And my
Was it
husband.
like a heavy man?
Yes,
I
and
remember
very
that. I remember
loud,
that.
even steps.
When was it? Like in the daytime or at nighttime?
Daytime, nighttime, but up in the attic. And my husband would insist on going up there, and I would beg him not to go up there, and we'd never find anything up there.
And sometimes you got to beg them to go up there.
Well, he was pretty fearless about making confrontations with it. I was terrified. I was beginning to realize that it wasn't a person we were dealing with. In his mind, he was still hoping to find a person that he could attribute this too, because after we bought the house, we did have people come back. They thought it still belonged to the previous owners, and we had to change the locks, and so we were finding real people in the house, and he was hoping he was going to find a child or a kid breaking into the house.
Trying to think logically.
Yes, yes. We always tried to base all the problems on the house to something in reality first. We would have the piano play, and we would run into the library, and it would stop, and we would think, well, maybe the cat walked across it, but it sounded like classical music. How could the cat do that? We had loud, explosive noises in the house, followed by breaking glass, and we could find no explanation for those either. And we thought, well, maybe there's an underground.
You didn't find no broken glass either, right?
We thought maybe there's an underground cave, and then my husband thought, well, maybe we're going through a time warp or something. We never really thought about in the terms of a ghost, a haunting, or a demon. Then I started to see people in the house. I saw a previous owner that died. I saw a woman in Victorian clothes.
Tell our viewers about that time when that man appeared. That
2 weeks after the previous owner died, shortly after we bought our home, I saw him in the kitchen, and he looked completely opaque, completely alive. I could see his clothing. He had something in his hand. He was walking over to the sink. And I was astonished because I knew he was dead, and here he was still in the kitchen alive, and we had a puppy then, and he jumped up on me, and I looked down for one instant at the puppy, and I looked up, and he had vanished, and I backed out of the kitchen, and my face said it all. My husband looked at me and says, "You've seen a ghost." He said, "You've seen the previous owner that died." And I said, "How did you know?" He said, "I felt his presence in the house. I felt him looking over my shoulder while we were doing renovations." And
Wow.
but his spirit didn't stay around long. It was just there for a short time after he died. It wasn't a frightening experience, except that whenever you have to deal with any supernatural event, even a good person that dies that comes back, it's so startling.
very startling. It
And
is.
You just don't expect to have these encounters. I mean, you're trying to take out the trash, you're trying to get on with your life. I remember Ed asked us, after these events, what did you do? And I said, well, Bobby went off to work. You still have to pay the mortgage. I would mow the lawn. We just went on with our lives.
You would take
really,
a long time mowing the lawn, right?
I have to say, we didn't spend as much time in the house as we would have liked to. I would never, ever sleep in the house alone. I would have friends or neighbors come and stay with me.
That's why you made it a B&B, right?
Yes. Well, it was hard having the guests come down because I was really hoping that we could blame the whole thing on mental illness. We needed a vacation, it's an old house, we're hearing things, and to have the guests come down in the morning and say that they saw someone in their room or had some other supernatural event happen, then we were beginning to realize that we had to do something.
This was bearing out everything that you experienced.
Yes, yes, and the more guests that we had in the house, the more activity we had, until the footsteps were no longer in the attic. Now the footsteps were coming into our bedroom. And I can't tell you how frightening that was. The first time I heard these footsteps, and they weren't up in the attic, I thought someone's broken into the house, and they're very bold because they don't mind making enough noise to wake us up. And because of the children, we'd put all the handguns away. So I thought, well, there's just no way I can get to the closet, load a handgun, and take care of this intruder. So I thought, I'll just lay in bed very still, and I'll just open my eyes enough to see him. And when he comes over the threshold, I'll have to rush him. And then I'll scream out for my husband, and maybe the two of us can subdue him. And the astonishment when the footsteps continued in the room, but I couldn't see anything. And I sat up in the room, and I could still hear the footsteps, and they went around, they stopped on my husband's side of the bed. And I woke him up, and he said, I heard them too. And I said, what are we going to do about this? And someone said, well, there's some Ghostbusters, and they didn't know where you were, and I ended up calling a local paper, and they told me where I could find you. And when you arrived, it was wonderful to just be able to pour out all these stories of things that happened in the house, have someone finish a sentence for me, to understand what we were going through, to not think we were crazy, to finally get over the denial of everything that we had lived for all those years of trying not to accept it. But the clincher came when you said that, yes, we had ghosts in the house, but we also had a demonic spirit. That I wasn't willing to accept. I think I told you to finish your tea and get out.
That's when you grabbed your rosary beads.
Well, we were not Catholics at the time.
No.
We were Protestants. And as Protestants, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the devil. Evil, it was just thought of something that could be within a person, that it was not an outside entity. This was something that the Catholic Church used to hold their congregation. You know, oh, Satan will get you, and you have to do is what we said. And I had a lot of trouble believing that. And when you left, I told Bobby, I said, well, they're just trying to frighten us. You know, I don't really believe in an evil spirit. And 10 days after I sent you away, I remember I called you and I begged you to come back. I was willing then to accept it on your terms, that yes, that there was this spirit in the house that had never been a human being, that was there purely as evil and wanted to destroy us, if not possess us first. That was a big thing to accept. It was a frightening thing.
Catholic priest that came in there and got possessed, right?
Yes, he did. He came to help us, and the poor man ended up becoming possessed. I was cooking dinner, and I told him he could stay, and his head just flew down onto the kitchen table and made this loud bang, and I thought, now he's had a heart attack. He's come here to help us, and now he's died. And I thought, oh, I'll have to call an ambulance. It's such a terrible thing to cope with. And then he lifted his head up from the table and and his eyes were glowing red, and I thought, no, he's possessed. And I said, Father, are you all right? And he said, I'm fine, dear. When's dinner? And then his head went thunk down on the kitchen table. He makes his gasping noise. His head comes up again. His eyes are glowing red. This happened 3 times, and I was very frightened for him. You know, dealing with a demonic spirit is not for everyone.
And I should say that the 3 times has meaning because it's an insult to the Trinity.
See, the thing that she's described, this priest that she's talking about.
Find out what finally happened.
Yeah.
Well, we had to. He came back to help us again, and
but he wasn't really the parish priest.
No, he was not. He was not the parish priest next door. No, we didn't even bring it up to him. He came to help us, and I realize that. But not everyone has a calling to deal with the demonic spirits. He may have a special calling somewhere else in the church, but only a very special person can be an exorcist. It's just, this thing was so evil that immediately it wanted to take a priest. What better defilement it could do than to possess a priest. And I realized that what we had in the house was far more dangerous than anything that we supposed in the past. That if it could do this to a priest, what could it do to us? And it did do horrible things to us. It was.
What other things did it do, Adie?
Well, my husband wanted to see it. He said everyone's seeing things in the house, manifestations. We had psychic photographers in the house. We had investigators. They were seeing things. He said, I know it's here. I feel its presence. I want to see it. So we took him out to this L, which is off the back of our house. It's unheated, and we knew that this was a special place to this monster in our home, because even unheated, one day I brought Lorraine out there. It was about 20 below. That's not wind chill factor. It was an actual 20 below where we were. There's an area the size of a basketball, just a space of air, and if you stuck your hand in it, it was like sticking in a furnace. Now, it had been like that since we bought the house. But, you know, being in denial, being such a disturbing thing.
It's like it was a hot pipe right there.
Like a hot section.
But there was no way.
Just a round section. Everything else would be freezing down below. There was no way for it to get any kind of heat source in there. And I remember Lorraine stuck her hand into it, and then she couldn't get her hand back out. And I remember she pulled her hand back out, and I could see a little fear on her face. And I thought, this is terrible, because these people are here to help us. And even here, she was showing a little fear towards it. And it was just a horrifying thing. So we went out to that part of the L, and we didn't have to wait long. 2 green fluorescent balls of light appeared. They danced around. They joined together, approached us, and then disappeared.
Ghost lights.
Wow.
Yes, and then the next minute I thought, well, where did it go? And I looked to my husband, and he was glowing green. And he stood up, and then he got a darker fluorescent green, and he was like this. And I realized he was no longer in his body, and suspended on the right side of his body in white was like his soul. It was a little bit smaller, like it would fit into his physical body. And I could see, and a psychic investigator was with us, and I had completely lost. At this point, I was backed up against the wall screaming. Out of everything that happened in the house, this had gone too far. It was by invitation. He wanted to see it. Now it had the right to possess him. And this man threw holy water on him, and my husband was restored to himself. And it was just a very horrifying thing. He said he remembered throughout the whole thing that I was telling him to tell it in the name of Jesus Christ to go away. But I didn't say that. And I said to Bobby, I said, someone was telling you that, perhaps your guardian angel, but it wasn't me. I assure you, I was screaming and I lost it through the whole thing. But that was just one of the horrifying incidences that happened in the house.
I'm trying to think how far into our investigation, Addie, that we brought the bishop to your home to exorcise it.
About 6 months after I first met you, I was introduced to this Catholic bishop, a traditional Catholic bishop, and I remember
Robert McKenna.
I remember I met him in the basement of his church, and I asked him to help us. And he said that he would be happy to help out. He had a couple of engagements, he'd be right over. And he said something wonderful. He said, and you won't be harmed between now and then. And he said it with such assurance. I thought, well, this has got to be the man. And I said, we have everything packed up. We have beautiful antiques. We had them all packed up in boxes. We had permission from the church next door to use their hall to store our things so that they wouldn't be destroyed during the exorcism and trying to remove this evil spirit that in the past had sent things flying around the house and smashing, of course. And he said, no, he says, put everything back. He said, I never get any breakage. And then he stood up and I kissed his ring, and I thought, he's a giant. He's so tall that his head had to be bent because he would have bumped the top of the ceiling in his basement. And I left with 2 psychic investigators, and I said, he's a giant. He's the tallest man I've ever seen. And they said, no, he's shorter than yourself, Addie.
He
and
is.
I said, he's huge. And they said, he gets larger when he has to deal with the demonic.
That's transfiguration.
Well, I thought, all right, I've seen many strange things in my house, but this I was not going to accept. The strange things that I saw usually were dealt with supernatural beings. This was a human being. And I thought, I just imagined him being larger than life because he said he could help us.
Yes,
and then I thought,
in
well,
your mind
I
he
knelt
was.
down, and even though I didn't know how to treat a Catholic bishop, I still kissed his ring. And I thought, as I knelt down, he just looked larger because I was looking up at him.
Right.
So when he arrived at our home, of course, he was short.
Yeah.
And then he
He's
started,
small.
yes, he was in a hurry. He mentioned he had some other place to go. He starts out in this Latin exorcism in Latin, and as he's reading along, nothing's happening. And I thought, well, this is another dead end. And we had gone through so many avenues. I thought, this just isn't working. There's no manifestations. We don't see it trying to battle this man or anything. And then I looked over this bishop, and he was enormous. He was as tall as my husband. My husband's 6'4". And I was going to say something, and my husband signaled me. He says, no, I see it too. But don't say anything. Don't interrupt him. It's working. And I have to say, it was much better after the first exorcism. It was now out on the lawn, and very rarely was it back into the house. And then he came back a year and a half later, and then he re-exorcised the house again. Once again, he shows up his normal height, a little shorter than myself. This time, I thought, I'm not going to take my eyes off of him. I'm going to stand behind him. I'm not going to even blink. I am going to look at the back of this man's head. And he starts off in the Latin exorcism, and then he grew in front of me in 3 stages. It was like stop-action photography. He was like in a blur, and then he stopped, and he was a little taller. Then a blur, and then he stopped, and he was crystal clear and a little taller. And then a third time a blur, and he stopped. And then I started to black out. This was just like such an incredible thing that I had seen. And then I thought, no, I have to get a hold of myself because it's working now. And I felt that he had God's ear, and I made a full confession. I said, God, I am not worthy. I know that you didn't help us 100% in the first exorcism, but we made changes in our life. And although I'm a sinner, I said, please, for the children's sake, because we were going to lose our home. I'd already told Ed that if we didn't get this thing out of the home once and for all, I was going to burn it down. Another person was not going to have to live in that house with what we lived in. And I said, please, for the children, do this. And then I made his afterthought. I said, I'll raise them as Catholics. And tears started pouring down my eyes. Now, I have a medical condition. I don't make tears. I have to use my own artificial tears. So, and right down the middle of my eyes, tears just started to come down. And I just felt like I was in the presence of God, and he was so awesome, and he was so beautiful, and he was truth, and he was justice, and he let me know that everything was going to be all right. And my husband comes up to me and he says, you're crying. And that kind of just broke this audience that I had with God. And I said, yes, and it's beautiful. And I thought, the floor must be soaked. How long did I stand here and cry? And I looked down at the floor, and the floor was dry, but I was still crying. And I realized as the tears left my face, they were disappearing.
Really?
It was so beautiful. And then we finished up with the exorcism, and the whole house just filled full of this beautiful smell of perfume. And I knew then it was the odor of sanctity that it had worked. We all smelled it. It was just the most awesome thing. It really was. It was just
What a beautiful
wonderful.
experience.
And then Bishop McKenna, he goes for the door, and I said, do you know that you get taller when you're here, when you're doing the exorcism? And he just smiled, got into a subcompact car. He didn't push the seat back, crammed himself in, and drove off, and that was that.
Well, I'll tell you, that man is a giant spiritually.
He is.
The strange thing about Bishop McKenna is that I've been with him for a whole day and a night, and I never see him take food. Of course, I was probably eating his share. He will not take food.
Never seen
He'll take
him
a
eat.
little water, maybe a little bread, when he's doing an exorcism, but he will not take any
He
food.
will never. He
And
never
I wondered,
doesn't.
how does this man live? He weighs about 135 pounds. He does stand about 5'8", and he's a giant, And I've seen him do things with Bill Ramsey, who was the werewolf in London. I've seen him do things with
Maurice Theriault.
It was a terrible exorcism. The man's head split open in front of us, blood coming down the face, out of the eyes, out of the mouth. And Bishop McKenna helped him for at least 8 years, but he went back into his old ways again, and he was possessed again. But that had nothing to do with Bishop McKenna.
No.
This man is probably the holiest, pious bishop and priest that I've ever come across, and I've come across a lot of them.
Yeah, he's a very beautiful
Well,
person.
talking about not eating, we had not realized that he had fasted. He and
Yes, he
and
always does.
The sisters. He has some Dominican
Beautiful
nuns with him. Had fasted for 3 days.
Did he bring the Dominican nuns to your home?
No, but he has now, not during the exorcism, but when we realized that they fasted, we now have a yearly dinner for them, and they all
Oh,
come
nice.
over and enjoy everything. And it's they're really truly wonderful people.
Hope it's more than
And
communion.
you don't have to worry 8 years down the road, but I'm going to fall back into my old ways, and the house is going to be repossessed because we've now converted to Catholicism.
Well, I have to tell you something too,
Isn't
Eddie.
that beautiful?
The first time we met you, you were an entirely different person. If I crossed past you in the street, I would not recognize you.
No. We
I
don't.
was unhappy.
Yes.
There was no question about
No.
that. It was just such a change for me to go through all this.
It changed like day and
I
night.
never.
Well, none of us would recognize you. I don't think you would recognize her, Tony. I
I
didn't
knew
recognize.
God, but I didn't worship Him, and my life just didn't have the meaning that it should. I mean, beyond my children, which were very precious to me, but to be given that assurance at that time with the second exorcism, to know that no matter what trials I'm going to have in my life, that everything's going to turn out
Well,
right.
you see, the thing I think that's important here with Addie's case is the fact of how God works in mysterious ways. Now, like Addie said, her life was certainly not on track for quite a while, but she was always bubbly and personable like she is right now. But
You call that bubbly and personable? I thought she was a little morose tonight.
Very
Talking
quiet.
very slowly.
well, a lot slower than before.
It was, well, I think what was so frightening about it is we didn't know when it was going to end, and it had gone beyond what was happening in the house. Now it was following us off the property. We had incidences off the property too.
What happened?
And well, a car tried to run me over, a car that was completely
I remember that.
stopped. It just on its own volition, on a completely level area, with no keys in or anything, came after me, and I attributed that to everything that was going on
That's
to the house.
diabolical.
And then other attacks. But some things have happened to me that I'll never discuss or share with anybody. I mean, whatever was in the house could rummage through your mind and just do horrible things to you that it knew only you would find horrifying. One thing that I remember personally from myself, one time I went to go pick up meat at the meat locker, and they were butchering rabbits. And I never thought rabbits ever made any sound except when they were killing them. They made these horrible squeals, and that stayed with me. And the thing in the house knew that bothered me. And occasionally on the lawn, after I'd been tossed off onto the lawn by Bishop McKenna, would chase me around at night if I tried to go out to the barn to tend my animals, and it would make that sound. It would just know how to reach into you and find the things that bothered you the most and confront you with them.
That's
And
the
that's-
death squeal of a rabbit.
That
It's terrible.
is very true,
you're
what you
talking
are
about.
saying. I have to say also, Tony, that this home, now I haven't been there for a period of time, but it's they have furnished it all in the period.
Oh,
and-
really?
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Beautiful
I mean,
home.
her furniture is beautiful, and all antiques, and all her china and silver.
Wow.
It's gorgeous. It's
So
absolutely.
basically, though, Addie, the phenomena has basically stopped. Is that what you're saying? You know, it's not really going on right now?
Well, about a year after the exorcism, we had a loud crash on the front door every couple of months. And the only explanation that we can have for it, it sounded like a car driven into the house, was that it was coming back and testing. You know, could it come
That's
back
how
in?
people describe just what you described.
Like
The Bell House in
the
Newtown.
Bell House in Newtown,
They said
right?
a truck crashed right through the pantry and everything just smashed and broke.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there's nothing broken.
Wow.
And
When
occasionally-
people, if you tell somebody this, you know, friends or something, how do they accept it?
They
They
don't.
believe it?
The neighbors don't let their children come over and play with ours.
No, they don't.
People think that we're strange. My own parents asked me if my husband and I were doing drugs.
Yep.
We went through a very terrible time. It was everything that we went through. The house was bad enough, but to have people not believe us, to think that we were strange or that we had made it up for whatever reasons.
Oh, yeah.
We homeschool the children now. They got teased in school. We took them out.
Wow.
It's
Well, you know,
made quite a big change
one of
in
the
our
first
life.
things, Addie, that people say to us, I'm so happy that somebody understands and they believe us.
Mm-hmm.
I thought we were going crazy.
I did. As a matter of fact, I was really hoping that when you and Lorraine came, you would sit down and say, there's nothing wrong with your house. You know, you need to see a doctor.
See a psychiatrist.
Yes. And I really didn't want to hear the truth. And when you told it to me, I guess I reacted like most people do, with anger and just such astonishment and denial to be told this. But all along, I knew that it was the truth. But it's amazing what the mind can do to itself, how people, when they're under such duress, can take things and just twist them around or put them up on a shelf in the closet and say, I'm not going to touch this.
Oh, sure.
I'm not going to think about it.
We're just about out of time, but I'd like to say thank you, Addie, for coming all the way out here from where you live. And we want to come for supper because we know you make a good supper. So about 8 o'clock tomorrow we'll be there.
Well, I wanted to thank everyone for watching, and I don't want them to be afraid to come forward. I know that initially I was, and initially we took some flack from the neighbors, but it's how you feel about yourself. To
Sure.
live with the truth is
Sure.
the most important thing.
So I'd like
Addie, you
to
were wonderful.
thank you also for coming out tonight. I really do.
Thank you, Addie.
So for those that need your address, Rob will probably put it up on the screen, but we're really short on time. So it's P.O. Box 41 in Monroe, Connecticut, 06468. Write us letters, call us up, do what you need to do if you've got a problem or any questions. Until next time, for Lorraine Warren, for Ed Warren, for Addie, I'm Tony Spera. Thank you.